Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing marvelously well. It's my distinct pleasure to be talking with Mr. Trey Gunn. Trey is an incredible musician who has played on some of my favorite records, and we've been recently featuring a lot of King Crimson, as you probably know. So it was amazing when Trey and I first got into contact with each other a few weeks ago, and he agreed to do this interview. Thank you, Trey. I really appreciate you doing this with us. You know, I was looking at your earliest credits. Did Toyah come before? Basically, did Robert Fripp's wife come first is what I'm asking.
I'll give you a little sped up version of life.
Please.
I left Texas. I wanted to study music. You know, as I got a little bit older, we moved into kind of punk rock and Talking Heads. And the punk rock thing was, you don't want to know what you're doing. That was the aesthetic. And to me, that just didn't make any sense at all. That if I wanted to be, if I was going to write, I wanted to learn how grammar works, so I wanted to study music, and I was able to study with a jazz guitarist, a guy named Jackie King, who was like a hard bop guitarist. And I actually had no idea really about the music or how it worked or even what was happening, but I did learn a lot. And Jackie went on to play with Willie Nelson for 20 years. So then I left and I wanted to go to college. So I went to college up in Oregon. So I moved to Oregon for 5 years and studied composition up there and played in a bunch of punk rock bands. Moving on, then I left there, and then I moved to New York City. And actually, before I left Oregon, this is a slightly amusing story. I was thinking, if this was 300 years ago and you wanted to be a musician, you would find the dudes or dudettes who had the thing that you wanted, and you would write to them and you would show up. And I thought, we just don't do that anymore, but maybe I should do that. So I thought, well, I'm going to make a list of the folks that I think that I could learn something from. So I made this list, and I put all my heroes, and Eno and Bowie and Adrian and McLaughlin and all these guys, and I put Robert's name on the list, Robert Fripp, and his name just kept going up to the top. And as I kept going down the list, I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure you could learn something from Peter Gabriel or Bowie. It feels like it's more like they just naturally do it, whereas it feels like Robert could actually tell you something. So after a couple of weeks of making this list, I saw that he was teaching guitar. And I was like, well, I'm going. So that's kind of how it started. He started teaching in 1985 or 86, I can't remember. And I met him on one of his courses. Then I moved to New York City. Then our relationship kind of moved away from the guitar, and I started playing the stick. And then the first project was, I can't remember now if we started the band with Toyah and Robert called Sunday Over the World. And then there was a little interim, and Toyah had me play on her record. Her first solo record was the first real record where I was on the stick, called Ophelia's Shadow. So that's the first, I guess you call it a major release. I don't know if you do anymore, but it was on EG Records.
It was definitely a major release.
Yeah.
So you wrote a letter to Robert?
No, I never did. I never did have to. He offered 6 courses. There was a little tiny ad in the back of Downbeat magazine that says Robert Fripp's offering 5 or 6 5-day courses in West Virginia right here if you want to come. And so I wrote. Then I went.
Amazing. Yeah. Do you remember how much it was?
$325, something like that.
Right. Which I suppose, in early mid-80s was considerable.
And you had to fly there and then take a train. And yeah. I was on the 3rd course, and there was like 18 or 20 of us. He had a personal meeting with everyone, like a 10 or 15 minute personal meeting. One of the interesting things about it for me was that I was already disillusioned with the guitar. I was playing guitar at the time as well as bass. And I had this feeling like everything I did on the guitar just had this blues flavor that is fine, but it just does not fit me. And I had this hunch suddenly one day that it had to do with the tuning. And then I remembered this instrument called a Chapman stick that's tuned in fifths. And I thought, oh, maybe that's what I should play. And I even went down to Emmett Chapman's house to look, but he couldn't sell me one at the moment. And then a few months later, I went to this course with Robert. And the first thing he did was he said, everybody tune your guitar in fifths. And that's what we did. And that totally changed everything for me. I was like, suddenly, oh, this is the tuning. I was right about the tuning. Like the fourth tuning had a flavor that just didn't suit me. So We all tuned our guitars down to a low C and put fifths on the instrument. And yeah, and I never played fourth since.
Wow. You've never looked back.
No, no. I kind of took it as if you want to get good at something that's unusual, you kind of have to put everything else in the closet. So I thought if I'm gonna, like when I started playing the stick, if I was really gonna play this thing, like the first day I put it on, I thought, oh, this is incredible. And then the second day I put it on, I was like, oh my God, now I see how much work is involved. If I'm really gonna do this, I pretty much have to put the bass in the case, put it away, guitar away, just say, this is my instrument. I don't know what I'm doing, but here I am. Take it or leave it. This is what I do. I actually don't play the stick anymore. I play this war guitar. I have this one here. You want to look at them? You mean?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's tuned in fifths?
It is. I have two of them here. I'll show you both of them because the other one is really cool too. So there's a
I don't think you have enough strings, my friend.
It's not as bad as it looks. There's just 5 bass strings over here.
Yeah.
And then 5 guitar strings.
Yeah. And it's ascending and descending in pitch.
Yeah, they go outwards. And
right.
and yeah. I tune it in octaves, so they're as you go out, the strings.
So what are the middle 2 strings? Are those C's?
C, yeah. This is the bass string is a low C below the E, and the other one is whatever a cello would be. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it goes C, G, D, etc.
The only thing that's a little strange is which I took from Robert's guitar tuning is that the top string is a minor third up. So it's all fifths and the top one is a minor third, which without getting too into it, it kind of brings the tuning back around. Because if you do 6 fifths, you end up with a low C on the guitar, and then the high string is a B. And Robert couldn't make it work. He couldn't get the string tuned up that high, so he went to a G. Anyway, that's a little goofy, but it's what's kind of cool about it is it's a little bit mirrors the overtone series a little bit. So you have the 2 highest strings. If you play chords, you can get a really tight voice up there.
Right.
That makes sense. And then the other one, and this one I've been playing for 20 some odd years. It's all over the Crimson stuff, but this also is all over the Crimson, the last record, The Power to Believe. Mark War built me this one. He said, do you want a fretless? It's like, I was terrified about playing fretless because I'd never played fretless, and I was always afraid of playing out of tune. And I was like, well, could you make me a half fretless? So if I got afraid, I could just go over to this side and I know I'd be in tune. So he made me this half fretless, and it's a semi-hollow body.
Yeah, I love semi-hollows.
There's only piezo pickups, and these are actually really fat nylon strings. I use it all over the Power to Believe record. We put distortion on it. We run it through SVTs.
Nice.
I think there's a second one, but it's basically one of a kind, and I hope nothing ever happens to it.
I'm sure it takes some considerable time to build one.
Yeah, I think so. And all the ones I have are made out of this wood Paduke that's very hard to work with. So I'm very happy that Mark did that for me.
I suppose another big highlight would, of course, be David Sylvian and Robert Fripp working together, which is that must have been quite an incredible experience. Yeah,
it was. I was a pretty big fan of David's, and a big fan of David's stuff that Robert had played on, the Gone to Earth record in particular. Yeah, I can't remember what we were doing right before that, but Robert called and said, David wants to do a series of concerts with him, and he wondered if I would want to join them. And I was like, sure. So the 3 of us met at David's apartment in London, and we worked for about a week and just generated a whole bunch of material, and went out and did a couple of short tours in Italy and Japan, I think, just as a trio. Really fascinating. It was really strange. And, it's funny, I was reading an interview with David recently, and I didn't realize what a leap it was for David to even go out on stage at the time. I didn't know that. I didn't know the backstory for him. I thought one of the cool things about the show is that we would start with just these kind of drippy soundscapes. And David was really into. He would never let us go out and do any shows without a cool lighting system. So he had like a lighting concept, So
Right.
it was always really beautiful and integrated, integrated in the whole artistry. And we would go out and do these super drippy soundscapes for like 20 minutes. And then he would start to sing. And so it was pretty cool, pretty cool. We didn't have much material. There was a lot of improv, and some of it was super dark and strange. And, David really,
Sounds wonderful.
David really, I didn't realize at the time. Now I do, because of a lot of records he made since then. He liked kind of, saying ugly isn't the right word, but like the music can be like, he encouraged Robert and I to just really go off the deep end with we would end the show on the super bleak urban landscape, it sounded like the planet's destroying itself.
It sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, and I was so grateful with how David just brought me in on that and really he just really trusted me to try stuff and kind of help with. I sat in the control room a lot with him, and Robert doesn't work at all like David works. Robert just wants to go in and play, as Bottrell explained to you.
I know. I didn't.
nailed
That completely goes against every preconceived idea about Fripp and Sylvian. You're right. You think Sylvian, because his voice is so emotional. You think that it would be just raw and just like, I like that take, and Robert would be the precision master.
Yeah.
And David basically flipped that.
I think David would. I remember when we first went in, and I'm just kind of like a fly on their two walls, because they have such long history, not just together, but in their own thing. And I remember David saying something about, or maybe Robert was saying he wanted to go in and just get really good takes. And David was like, well, can't we maybe like, like do different guitars on the verses and do a little thing. And Robert kind of said yes, but I could kind of feel like, not really.
Yeah.
I'm going to play it down and we'll do some overdubs, but we're not going to go. He just doesn't do that kind of sculpting that David really goes in and sculpts,
But when you think of Robert on Scary Monsters, and you think about those guitar parts just being so left of center in every way, just the performances, but the tones.
Yeah.
I was at the power station a few weeks ago, and we were just like, where did they record that? And we played back the record to an engineer there, and they think, we think it's this bathroom here, like that sounds like the sound of the bathroom with that guitar.
Yeah.
So I imagine, everybody in England, sorry to interrupt, everybody in England, it's Sylvian, you can tell all of us were obsessed with Bowie.
Yeah, of course. How could you not?
Yeah.
I was in Texas. I remember that one of the engineers that we used, Tony Arnold, on some of the older stuff when I was there with Robert, and I think he did the Beat record. Oh, sorry, the Three of a Perfect Pair record.
Love that.
Tony was a super old school BBC engineer with the lab coat and and he said when they would audition, your audition as an engineer was put the tape on the machine. That was it. They would watch you put the tape on the machine, and they could know everything about you. And so Tony I think Tony built Robert's rig that was used on Scary Monsters in that time. And I remember him telling me, and I don't even know if I believe this, but he told me that he took a flanger, like he took all these pedals apart and he took a flanger, and somehow, the flange is going like this, and he put a distortion on it only when it was up in the upper part. And that's what he said was a Scary Monster sound. I was like, okay, I guess. I don't know. Maybe.
I suppose it makes some sense. I mean, what it sounds like, he's low passing it. So it's probably sidechain taking a signal off. So splitting the signal, low passing that, and then just distorting the high end. So if you're playing a low note, there'd be very few amounts of high harmonics, but the higher you would get, it would get louder in that area of distortion. Yeah, it is possible. Yeah. It's probably just a split signal, and then low passing into distortion. Doesn't surprise me, but I love this. I'm interviewing you, but we're both fans of Robert's, so we can get to talk a little bit about that. That's great.
Exactly.
And so Vroom, pretty exciting EP, pretty mind-blowingly good. Did you know it was going to be, because was that presumably the first time you'd worked with the other guys?
We met, I think we had a couple of days rehearsal at Bill's house, but Adrian couldn't make it, so there was only the five of us. I think the first time we all got together was right around then, some of the material had been floating around. Robert and I had been playing around with the track Vroom in various ways for maybe a couple of years, maybe. I didn't even really know what was going on, like with all these drums, and the room we recorded in was quite small, as David probably even overblown how big the room was. I didn't know that Bill and Pat didn't know whether it was even going to work. They weren't sure how to do the drums, and Bill, funny little story, Bill really didn't want to do, and he even used this exact example. He didn't want to do the Allman Brothers where they're playing along together and the kick drums are flamming. He didn't want to do anything like that. And of course, at that time, Bill had probably been in more double drummer bands than anybody. It's kind of like you start with an idea and then you try to make it work, but then hopefully you're listening enough to notice where it isn't working and where it is working, right? That's like it kind of is for every record I make or project. You got to start with something. So, we started with this double trio idea, but you can't really have two bass players. Somebody's got to be the bottom feeder.
The bottom feeder.
so there was, and I don't know. I haven't really listened to the record in the way of like, what are the kick drums doing? How did they make it work? But they made it work.
I've always listened to it and loved it and never really heard any issues. You're correct. And then, of course, when I saw you guys live with that double trio, Tony was playing a 3-string a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So he was definitely fulfilling that low role,
Yeah.
Which gave you a lot more freedom to have some fun.
Yeah.
I suppose I have to ask the question that everybody poses underneath the videos we do of what is the dynamic with Robert in the studio? Because obviously he's been the only constant in every single lineup, but he's a very smart man. We both know that. Everybody knows that. So smart people tend to surround themselves with much smarter people so they can sit back and do their job. So is that
right.
More of the dynamic? He chooses the musicians he wants and let them, or does he have a little bit of a, hey, try this, try that?
Boy, he doesn't really have much of a try this or try that.
Nice.
And also keep in mind that we made the Thrack record in 2 weeks, maybe 3. We made the Vroom record in a week. So, making records is maybe 2% of the playing. It's mostly a live thing. And I think that was what was unusual about the Vroom record. We hadn't played any shows. When we made the Thrack record, we actually went to Argentina for a month.
Wow.
First, and played 18 shows there.
Incredible.
And then went right to real world. And, as much as I thought we might do some of the little fiddly sculpting kind of stuff that David Sylvian does, you've already worked out so much playing 18 shows. There really just wasn't that much to do. You played it down 2 or 3 times. That was kind of it,
That's what I always gathered. I feel like truly emotionally intelligent people just get very talented people, surround themselves with the talented people, put them in the right person in the right job, and then let them perform.
That's not the right way to say it, but certainly one of Robert's strong suits is knowing when the right people for the right moment in the right context, then what's to say? You don't need to say anything. Everybody, at least in all the projects I've been involved with, everybody wants the thing to be the best that it can be. It's just a matter of, the only kind of massaging Robert would do was what Tony calls kind of quality control. you have to have freedom to try stuff, but then at some point you have to decide, well, this goes here or not.
Yeah, I think for me, when I listen to Vroom, I hear when it's at its heaviest, it's massively heavy. It's
Yeah.
super, super heavy, but it's a heavy, and you're really emphasizing this. It's a band that's rehearsed, that's been playing live, that goes into a studio and records, as opposed to a modern heavy production is multiple layers of the same parts and the same instruments, and
Right,
and
right,
maybe
right.
they change out an amp or a pickup combination to give a different tonality. When you listen to Crimson, actually at any period, you hear you hear sculpted performances that have been done by the
Mm,
individuals that work
mm.
together to create the sound, as opposed to studio trickery.
Yeah, yeah. Which that takes a lot more time.
It takes a lot more time.
And I really enjoy it, but it is a different thing when you're it's almost like you're trusting your body more to play the right thing. I actually do remember one little moment in the Vroom sessions where Robert and I decided that we were going to overdub a couple of more slash chords on the song Thrack. And I was kind of nervous about my sound, and I ended up not being happy with the stick just another couple of years later, but I was wrestling with the sound. And I remember we were doing our overdubs together because he was playing in 5 and I was playing in 7, and we needed to do it at the same time.
Like you do.
And I said to him, I don't know, is this a good sound or not? And he's like, it's your choice, kind of basically. Like, I have no input on your sound. This is I think what he said was, this is the sound I'm using. Thanks, buddy. Yeah. Okay. So, but it was a little bit like that. Like you were encouraged to make your own choices, and hopefully they are the good ones,
Yeah. Sounds like he's being a good conductor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Vroom was kind of the tester, because that's what got you the album deal, wasn't it?
No.
Oh, it wasn't.
No. And maybe this is an interesting backstory, and I probably have most of the information. I don't want to say that we were like one of the first independent bands,
Right.
but Robert set a tone from that Vroom release that really kind of went out into the world, and just kind of, now it's a given that musicians own their own music.
Absolutely.
And so what he did was, with the Thrack record, we signed, or he signed a deal with Virgin for the Thrack record, and said, we want to make an EP on our own label that we own. First of all, you don't get to own the Thrack record. We're going to own the copyrights. Robert was like, I'm not doing that ever again. And then the Vroom record was not on Virgin, but it was like, I don't know how they pitched it to them. Probably like, we're going to do a lot of the promo with this record. And they didn't think we would probably sell very much. And then Thrack would be the main record. So it was actually organized beforehand. And that was the first record on Discipline Records, which is still going. And the kind of business model is, the musicians own the music, and any other concept is absolutely reprehensible.
I skipped over 1,000 years.
Along the way, I was doing solo records. That was my first solo record, which came right after I finished working with David and Robert. And I used, or maybe kind of overlapped a little bit. I mean, I've been recording forever and ever. I'm like a Porta Studio guy from back in the day, of which I just digitized all my Porta Studio tapes back to my very first recording ever in 1977.
Wow, you've kept them all. That's incredible.
I did. And I had to bake my cassettes, which I did, and it worked.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So for 1,000 years, it was very much, and the process was very influenced by working with David Sylvian and this kind of layering and building up of a story kind of thing.
And you've sang. There's vocals on it.
There are vocals on it. It's a rare thing. I used to sing a lot more. Now I sing just for practicing.
Tony Childs, This Woman's Boat.
Yep, that was through Bottrell, because Bottrell produced that record, and he brought me over to Real World. I think I only went to Real World 2 or 3 times, but each time there, I played on so many records while I was there. You know, Michael Brook was doing a record with Shrina Voss, and when I was there for Tony Childs, what a great atmosphere that place was. And what Peter did on purpose or not, I don't know. But the dining room, everybody shares the dining room, so you go off in your own studios, but everybody comes together for meals and interacts. And yeah, what a great place.
That's a wonderful idea. You get to meet other musicians working there and get more work.
Yeah, and more interaction, because it is a little weird, this isolated studio thing. Probably less where you are, but most of the studios I've been in, they're you're trying to get away from everybody. Whereas real world, you share meals with everybody.
Moving on to Thrack, you said that you did that album in 3 weeks. Is that everything, including mixing, the whole shebang?
I doubt. No, not mixing. I think we recorded everything in 2 weeks or less. And then I don't know how much time Adrian spent on the vocals. Not much. Maybe a week, maybe less. I don't know. I really can't. I can't quite remember. Did we mix it there? Yeah, we did mix it there. I don't know if we mixed it at the same time. Probably not at the same time, but I don't know. But I do remember David had this beautiful thing of a giant sheet of paper for each song around the room, and the control room is so enormous, and we had so many pieces that there was just like paper all the way around the room, and he would pull up Thrack or whatever. I guess maybe we had mixed it and then we were putting the running order together, and boy, that was really hard to do. We put a couple of running orders together because it's a lot of little pieces. I remember a couple of running orders where we sat down and listened to it, and we all hated the record. It just absolutely didn't flow at all. And I was suddenly getting nervous, like, oh, this actually isn't very good. And then, Robert's really great about that. Robert and David kind of flipped a few things around, and, you can't listen to the whole record too many times, maybe a couple of times in the day. So we had to take a break and came back and was like, oh, wow, this actually is really good now. Just a few things. That's a lost art.
Yes, I feel like, was it 9 Inch Nails where they hired Bob Ezrin to come in to make the record make sense because of the wall, because of how the wall just flows from beginning to end across a double album. Yeah, it makes sense. You randomize Thrack, it probably wouldn't make sense.
No, not the same. Yeah. I still think like that, even though it doesn't make any sense to, but I still do.
It's tough for any artist. Whatever the artist's top song is, it will always be the top song.
Right.
Because people will open it up.
Right.
I'm assuming, Schizoid Man's probably Crimson's top song because it's in so many movies. But because it's the top song on Spotify, it's always going to be the top song because somebody who's discovering the band for the first time will always play the top song. Right. Yeah. And so this whole journey of discovery that we used to have is now very predictable.
Yeah. And you know what? One of the things that I always liked to do was, how you were supposed to kind of load your best stuff at the front of the record. For me, when the record is really amazing is when the last song is amazing and it feels like the last song. And that's one of the things I think Peter Gabriel pretty much has always done. Like the last song, Biko, just feels like the end of the record. And an A&R guy probably wouldn't have let him put it at the end of the record, but that's where it belongs.
The artists we're talking about, the Fripps and the Enos and the Bowies, they're the completists, aren't they? What is it? I asked Tony Levin a very similar kind of question. With Tony, he played with Paul Simon, which was stadium pop at that point. And I'm going to ask you a similar kind of question because obviously you're making a great living playing with these incredible musicians and making amazing albums that you can be really, really proud of. And the question I asked of Tony, because of course he'd also played on Double Fantasy with my friend, Jack Douglas producing. And I'm just like, you had a clear career path there. You can go prog and, and do well, or you can go off into the worlds of stadiums and make multiple.
Do really well.
Do really, really well. What's your driving kind of force? I mean, you wake up every day wanting to be excited about the music that you make.
Yeah, for better or worse, I really have an urge to do something that's not there already. It's not a very good career path. I mean, the
Comparatively.
truth, the good side is you figure out over time, hopefully, I have at least. The question I feel like musicians need to ask is not how to be successful, but how to organize your life so that you get to do what you want to do. And if what you want to do is, play bass in Mark Anthony's band, like a friend of mine does, then that's what you want to do. For me, I kind of need to go. It's not even a choice really. Like if it's already been done, it's very hard for me to want to do it. I feel a little uncomfortable. I feel like other people are better at it because they're already doing it, and I'm not really kind of exploiting the uniqueness of my instrument, or so that automatically puts you in a more of an independent film world than a Spielberg world. And now because I'm older and I'm very clear about some things that I'm working on at the moment, to go out on a stadium tour would take away from what I want to do. Okay, maybe, you do that for a year and you make a whole lot of money and you can do whatever you want. It still doesn't fulfill what I feel like I'm here for.
Project One, I never actually asked, was that a deliberate thing for you guys to do something outside of Crimson? Because obviously, when Robert restarted the band the first time, they weren't even going to call themselves Crimson, wasn't it? What was the thinking behind Project One then?
So the projects 1 through 4 and beyond, well, pretty much the double trio broke down at rehearsals in Nashville. After all the Thrack tour, there was a kind of breakdown. I'm not entirely sure what happened, but something to do with Bill and Robert, and who knows? Those guys had so much history, but the thing just kind of broke apart, and rehearsals just were over, I think, or we had a few ideas, and then we kind of, I think it was a writing period, and the thing just kind of broke down, and then in that interim, weirdly, Bill asked Robert if he wanted to do a series of improv nights in London. Nice. So it was Bill's initiative to just have a duo. And then and Robert said, sure. And then Bill said, well, since we're doing it, maybe we should get Tony to join us. And then Robert said, well, if we're going to do that, let's get Trey to join us. So that's how Project One started. Although what's kind of weird is that Robert and Adrian and I were already playing around with what became Project Two. We were meeting the three of us. And I think we even recorded the whole Space Groove record that we did. That was all improv. And so this kind of led into this, what Robert called the fractalization of Crimson, where there were different combinations. There was Project 3 with Robert and Pat and I, and then Project 4 with Tony and Pat and Robert and I. And man, what a great period that was for me. I really loved it. It was completely improvised, so almost no structure. In fact, for the Project One shows, Tony said, let's have a rule that if we have 1 day rehearsal just to check our gear, let's have a rule that none of the four of us ever play together at the same time, so that when we go on stage, it'd be totally fresh. And so that's what we did. Man, really, really, really strikingly unusual. We played 4 nights, 2 sets a night at the Jazz Cafe, the four of us. It was tough. I mean, it was draining. It was draining to go out on stage with nothing. I think maybe Robert and I would kind of make a little set list, or let's start in F sharp. But as soon as we got out on stage, we did something totally different. And I can remember by the third night, we finished the first set and we went back to the dressing room, and everybody had played everything they knew. Like whatever we had brought to the table, we had whatever sounds, whatever, Bill had this and Tony had this, and Robert and I had the stuff, and then we had to go out to play another set, and we had already played everything there was. And we were so empty that the second half of the set was really striking, because now we were playing basically what we don't know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And so the projects kind of became that kind of a thing where it was super open, and there were only a few of us. Like the trios were very open because you could just go anywhere and you could just follow the melody you're on wherever it goes, even if the guy next to you is going somewhere totally different. It didn't matter. It was very playful. It was the most playful I've ever played with Robert. He was completely, the Project 2 project was just completely silly, ridiculous. He was playing saxophones and vibes, and it's almost like he was playing kind of like the guitar playing music that he kind of grew up on in wedding bands in Bournemouth, but with, like, as if Coltrane, I think of it as Coltrane from outer space at the same time.
Hence Space Groove.
Yeah.
I like it.
And the general idea was that we would be generating ideas for Crimson instead of going into a rehearsal space and and hammering out stuff. And to a degree that was true. We had Robert and I had a bunch of little ideas that we would improvise with and play around with that ended up becoming stuff on the Power to Believe record and the Construction of Light record.
I love how Robert has just been going through everything now, and there's just music for days. Mm-hmm. It's just really beautiful.
Pat and I would change our parts a lot. I felt like when we were on the road, like every 10 to 14 days, some of the material would really change how we were playing it.
When did you move from the Chapman away from the Chapman stick?
It was after we recorded Thrack, but before the tour, right after it. So 96, something like 96. That.
So you've had the majority of your career actually away from it.
Yeah. Mostly on this thing.
And what's that
model?
That one. That one. And what's that model called again?
The Trey Gunn model.
There you go. Link down below.
Exactly. You can't get one anymore. You can buy a used one maybe, but
it might be nice before we slip into the 2000s to talk about Zuma, John Paul Jones. And I'm wondering, was that the same album that Pete Thomas played on?
I believe so.
Yeah, because Pete and I were talking about that. He was telling me this story. I suppose I'm mining you for some John Paul Jones stories, but the story he told me, they got set up, and he said John had these stacks of bass amps in the room. It was just the biggest bass sound he'd ever heard in his entire life. And they were jamming, and John Paul Jones maybe was a bit stuck. So he said, well, let's reconvene the next morning. And he said he went out for a walk, and it's a very, very typical sort of English, Wellington boots, flat cap, all of the stuff. Went out for a walk, came back and was like, by Jove, I've got it. And then played this part. And it was just completely came out of his mind of him thinking about how he wanted to do it and come back. So it was just a nice illustration of the mind of John Paul Jones. So I'm mining you for stories. Do you have any?
We shared a manager. So David Sylvian's manager, Richard Chadwick, became Crimson's manager, and he also became John's manager. Wonderful. And John would come to the Crimson shows, and I met him a few times. And I'm a big John. He was my hero as a kid.
Amazing.
For lots of reasons. I didn't even really know how many reasons until I met him and went around his studio, and he played piano for me. So he had this project that he wanted to do, and I think he was mostly concerned about the live show. And he asked me if I, wanted to be involved and do this trio with him and Pete. I don't know if Pete ended up doing the live shows or not, but I said, oh yeah, that sounds really cool. And John kind of warned me. He's like, I'm pretty much a dictator, so consider your answer wisely. I was like, oh, that's fine. And so what he did was he had me come in and play on a couple of his songs on Zuma. And actually, this leads right into the projects. It was right before the projects.
Oh,
And
okay.
Mark Moore had built me an 8-string instrument, which I don't have now. I kind of had this idea that this, with the double trio, my instrument here, it's stereo. So there's bass side and guitar side, and you can have double, two different sounds at once. And it started to become rather preposterous to me that I had 2 sounds at once in the double trio with all the sounds in the guitar sense. And I thought maybe I should just get an 8-string mono instrument made, which at the time was pretty radical. Now you just have, you have 8 and 7-string, 9-string guitars with the full range, but it was a bit radical at the time. And Mark had built it for me. And the first session I did was John flew me down to LA to play on Zuma. And I really had no idea what I would play or what it would be like. And somehow in that session, maybe he was invoking the Butthole Surfers, I don't know, but he kind of got out of me this particular kind of thrashing, almost atonal, kind of my version of Scary Monsters playing a little bit, but even more like a little more thrashier. He somehow got that out of me on that record. And that, for me, that was kind of opening up to be like a solo, kind of a solo thing that incorporated my whole thing. And for me, that kind of opened the door to how I played on the projects.
But it came out after the project, so I presume it was in a long period.
Yeah. And then what happened was Crimson just was working too much that I couldn't go out with John. So he got Nick Beggs, a stick player in England, to join him. And then at some point they even were our opening act with Crimson. So we did a double bill with John. But when I first met John, I was in England and he had me come over to his loft and kind of show me around the studio and play me some stuff and tell me what he was up to. And man, I walked in and there's the triple neck acoustic guitar mandolin thing. He's like, I was like, oh wow. He's like, you want to play it? I was like, I don't think I do want to play it. I don't think I want to, but he played me a bunch of stuff that he was working on. And man, I got to tell you, he was the secret weapon of that band. He really was. He had so much musicality and so much fluidity on all instruments and orchestration. He had on the wall all the orchestration he had done for the Donovan record,
and Stones,
and yeah.
Didn't you? I think he did the arrangement for "She's a Rainbow," didn't he?
Probably so. Yeah.
He was probably 20 or something.
Yeah. So kind of my hero went up even higher. Hearing him play the piano. Yeah.
Well, he's got a lot of credits on the Zeppelin stuff as being the main riff writer on quite a few of those big songs.
Yeah.
We assume was Jimmy's actually.
But most people still just assume it's Jimmy doing everything,
Right.
And that's what happens when you're a bass player.
Well, you sort of moved into the dual world of guitar player and bass player simultaneously.
Probably so. So.
You can fulfill both roles. California Guitar Trio that we were talking about briefly before is been around in many iterations, so it would seem.
They've done a lot of stuff. The earliest thing we did was we had what was called the Robert Fripp String Quintet, which was the 3 California guitarists, myself and Robert, and we did a bunch of shows and some recordings, and that was cool because it was like chamber music. We even played a bunch of Bach pieces too.
Oh, Damage!
That was the Royal Albert Hall album.
That's the Royal Albert Hall album, but it took a few years to come out.
I think Robert and Bottrell did a mix of it. Because David and David had mixed the first day, so they gave it to David and Robert to mix. And I don't think Sylvian was happy with the original mix, so he did another mix. And I don't know which one is my preference. You'll have to listen to them both and see. One of them is probably rawer than the other.
Where are you at now? What are you working on? Are you doing solo stuff?
Let me tell you what I'm working on.
I'd love to know.
I have, my life has been in turmoil since the pandemic and deciding to move from Seattle down to New Mexico, which is kind of a year process. I have been working on kind of a project that's just been in the cracks for a while. And now I'm really trying to finish it, which is I am making a record with just my instrument as if it's a string quartet or quintet of those things.
Oh, incredible.
No drums, no vocals, no nothing, just that. And I kind of set myself that challenge to see if I could do it. And the challenge got a little more complex because I decided that I wanted to use just attacky sounds. So I'm not using any swells, or I'm actually trying to write the music without any production on it, just the raw notes, and have it work. And boy, has that been challenging. And so what I've done is I made a sample library of my instrument, and I've been writing with MIDI to get all the parts. And then I have to go back in and play everything. And some of it is really hard to play because I wrote it not on the instrument. And it's really cool. It's really, really cool and super challenging, and taken me forever, ever and ever and ever. But it's really cool. And actually something happened last week I wanted to tell you about, this little production story that kind of surprised me. There's one track that I have that's, I'm trying to make the compositions work regardless of the sounds. It's so easy to make interesting sounds, especially with all the effects that I have, and that can kind of easily carry. So I'm trying to just make the notes make the thing work, the notes and the rhythm. And I'm allowing the phrases to be whatever shape they want to be. So I'm not working to any kind of grid per se. If it wants to be longer, I'll let it be longer. But I had a piece that I've been working on that's pretty heavy sounding. And I went back and listened to it a couple of weeks ago, and it sounded, I had already gone in and I had made the MIDI mock-up, then I went in and played everything. And then when I went back and listened to it a couple of weeks ago, it sounded too slow. I was like, shit, I'm going to have to speed it up and re-record the whole thing. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do if I have to do it. And I thought, well, before I do that, let me play around, because I've got a lot more tools than I used to have. And so I put some saturation on it and just the right kind of reverb, and it sounds the right tempo now. And it actually doesn't even, it probably makes more sense to you than it does to me, but it was just kind of flat and not moving, and now it's moving. So now I feel very happy that I don't have to re-record the whole thing.
I presume the saturation just makes it seem more exciting.
Yeah, probably so. And having it in a room, I've been working with totally dry sounds so that there's no effect. So it's putting in some room. Yeah, it's great. So I don't know where I am in that process. It's been going on for a couple of years, and now I'm really trying to do several, hours a day. I can't do too many hours. I get fried because it's very meticulous. Nowadays, how I think about the DAW, it's not just now, but it's been for the last 10 years, is that the sound is the score. If the notes aren't right, you just move the sound. But in this case, I've really had to replay a lot of stuff. So that's what I do.
That's amazing.
And I have a coaching program. So I coach musicians a good chunk of the week. It's kind of one of the things that I really do, and I really love doing.
Are you coaching them for creativity?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that process.
It's something I discovered about 12 or 14 years ago that, people, for so much of my life, people would come to me and want me to show them how to play my instrument. And they would come over and I would show them what they need to do to play it well. And they would go away and I would never see them ever again.
Right.
And I kind of realized somewhere about 12 or 14 years ago that this teaching model that I have just wasn't working. That this idea of I have secrets that you want to, that's how I think of teaching. Like I have secrets that you want to know, right?
Sure. Yeah.
and information that you want to know. And that model just didn't really work for me. And then I came across this coaching model where basically instead of me having secret information that you want to know, you have an aim that you want to realize, and I help you with that. And it's a very different thing because it's really me inquiring into what you want to do and how you want to do it and which part of it really is genuine for you. A lot of musicians have a lot of ideas, but when it comes down to it, sometimes what they're actually doing isn't helping it, if that makes any sense. Or they think, like I'll give you a simple example. People will often come to me thinking that they're ready to be serious as a musician, which for them means it's time to learn how to read music and get serious. Right. And I was like, well, are you sure?
Yeah.
What do you need to read music for? Adrian Belew doesn't read music, and he passed the audition for Frank Zappa. So we kind of break, but part of it is breaking down, what's going to get you to where you want to go. And I love it because I get to go kind of underneath the creative process and taste it. And I have all sorts of strange people, drummers, harmonica players, composers, guitarists, bass players. Some people do want information, and I have information, but it's a different way of looking at it, where we're just really inquiring with your aims and finding the best way to get there.
The last part that resonates with me, I feel like when I'm teaching people, I want to get them to a place that I've come to after failing 50 times. I can elevate you to a place a lot quicker. But sometimes, unfortunately, I know myself as a human being, the only way for me to learn is to fail 50 times.
Right.
It's good. Yeah. I suppose that's the skill, isn't it? Knowing when to sort of unleash information on them that is going to be maybe a little bit frustrating, but if they get past it, they're going to come out much better than if you just kind of give them the solution.
And the other part of it for me, getting very technical, is that I'm an artist, so I see everything from that perspective. So if you bring me a piece of music for me to help you with it, it's impossible for me not to see what I would do with it. And that's my experience with a lot of teachers, is that they're kind of projecting their vision, and you can't help it. And what I found with the coaching is I go into a different zone where, like, I don't care what you want to do. I don't even have to like what you're doing. In fact, I could dislike it. But if I know what your aim is and I hear what you're doing, we can get there. And I don't have to use any of my taste factor. Still, like, you still want to make something good, but it's not, it wouldn't be, and sometimes I even have to qualify it. Like, okay, if you're asking what Trey would do here, I would change the rhythm this way, but you have to decide what you want to do. And most people get that. It doesn't make sense to me to kind of teach somebody to make something the way I would do it. That just seems absurd.
Yes, you want to encourage uniqueness. I mean, I remember when I was first coming up, there wasn't a lot of love for anybody that went to Berkeley, because everybody that came out of Berkeley, you could close your eyes and you'd be like, it sounded exactly the same, and they were learning the same specific riffs and the same 2-5-1 improvisational techniques. But then the guys that you liked that went to Berkeley all quit after 1 or 2 semesters or the first year, and it was always an interesting kind of dynamic. But now, of course, all of those kinds of places have really figured it out as well. Now, when kids are graduating from these universities, they really have something now. They really have something. They've been they've figured out how to encourage the individuality. And that sort of brings me back to what I've always loved about Crimson. And I wonder now, with you speaking as a non-British person, what I liked about Crimson was I felt like the technique and the creativity in all of the musicians that played with that band was always seemed to be growing at the same level, where a lot of the criticism I could level at some of the purely American prog Was it always seemed to be about the technical, and the creative was sort of incidental? There's certain bands that we don't have to mention the name of, but it just seemed like they all individually went away and wrote really complicated riffs and then got together and turned it into one song.
Yeah.
Crimson feels like the musicality and the creativity is, maybe it comes first, but even if it didn't come first, it's never being leapfrogged by the technique.
Yeah. I would agree. I mean, I think what you just described is a complete confusion.
Yeah,
and maybe it has to do with having a clear aim of what you're doing, and maybe a little bit of the confusion that the twiddly bits, as we call them, is the important part, and it's not actually. And Robert had a really cool aesthetic about the twiddly bits, which is you only need a few of them. And if you actually have less of them, there's more authority. They give authority to all the non-twiddly bits.
Yeah.
And so, for me, it's also, if you just look into I guess the art form is maybe the way of saying it. I'm not sure, but it's also about balance. Like you have balance in a mix, but then there's also balance in the form, and you can't have like all red all the time. You can't have all fast all the time. There's a balance of the elements, and I feel like with Crimson we did that really well. I mean, the track Red is a perfect example of that. It's
Absolutely,
got a little bit of everything, and there's space for it, and everything, the architecture sits and does what it does because of the architecture of it, and
it's a highlight. Yeah, that's a highlight.
It's not about the players. It's not about the players. That's probably the thing. And maybe Americans, because we're even more capitalistic than than over in Europe. I don't know.
I think it's a human condition. I relate to it because it's going back to that idea of the teaching. We want to go, well, just get me, it's like a kid when you first show up for a guitar lesson, saying, I want to play, and then insert famous guitar riff. But there's, they don't, like if it's a blues-based rock guitar part, it'd be a lot better for that guitar player to learn some basic blues. So when they came to play that blues rock guitar part, they understand where it came from. Charlie Gillett made in that book, In the Sound of a City, he made this argument about that, where he said that Sabbath, Deep Purple, and Led Zeppelin all listened to blues to create heavy rock. Aerosmith listened to Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, and then Motley Crue listened to Aerosmith. And, he's making a pretty big point. It's that voyage of discovery that gives you the uniqueness, your interpretation of the root of something, and then it grows into a different tree than the one of just like picking the cherry out of the tree and going, okay, I just want to copy this. But the kinds of bands that have that, where it's purely about the technique, I'm sure it's interesting to listen to. But that's the reason why I always thought Three of a Perfect Pair was a very misunderstood record, because I do agree Discipline is an absolute masterpiece, and everything I'm sure that Robert wanted to do when he got the band back together. But Three of a Perfect Pair, which is probably more leaning, I guess, towards Adrian's songwriting.
But it's weird songwriting.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
When you go, I'm ready to go, I'm on my way. That like pop song comes out, out of a fretless guitar part into this like full-blown sing-along chorus, and then back into this dig me, give me more of that. I love music that it just keeps me interested and I never get bored of. That's what makes Crimson, those kinds of things, whether it be Red, whether it be that.
And also getting specific about what you're talking about with this kind of cherry picking the parts, with at least my experience with Crimson and working with Robert, and how I work now as well, is at a certain point you have to ask yourself, is this the vocabulary that fits? And Crimson, at least my experience of it, goes underneath it and says, what's the vocabulary? What kind of chords, what kind of rhythms, and not necessarily picking what's around you naturally anyway. Like we built we built that vocabulary at the same time as the pieces. It's super demanding and fatiguing, and you kind of need a break to just play a pop song. I mean, that's kind of what Adrian in a way is the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I mean, his resume is insane as well, as you pointed out. Zappa. I mean, yep. Talking Heads. I mean, and Crimson. I mean, that's some pretty diverse music there, to say the least. All absolutely amazing. So when can we expect your solo record?
I don't know. I'm slow. Probably maybe by the fall. Maybe. I want it to be right. And I do get nervous about taking a long time doing stuff, that things could get lost. But every time I kind of go back to it and work on it, it gets better. So at a certain point, I'll have to stop.
I hear you. As long as you're not correcting things too much, you'll be okay.
No.
Yeah. I've done that where I've been working on some solo stuff. It's been a few years, and then opened it up and been like, there is no feel, no groove, nothing in this song. What did I do? And I realized, this note was slightly out. This note was slightly out. Before I knew it, I'd corrected like 50 things.
Yeah, I'm trying not to do that.
It's very hard though, isn't it? Because when I produce somebody else, like if I was producing you and you were pulled back, I would be like, wow, Trey's got great feel. If I play back, I'm like, I'm out of time.
Yeah. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
It's totally true. It's totally true. You almost need, that happened in the Sylvian Fripp sessions, this track Darshan, that I think is the last track on the record. It's like, it was a whole reel of tape. It's like 15-minute piece.
Yeah, masterpiece. Yeah.
We came up with a drum loop, and then all David and Robert and I, and then this percussionist, Mark Anderson, I think his name, who plays with this guitarist, Steve Tibbetts, all four of us played down the whole 15 minutes together. And when we were done, Bottrell's like jumping up and down. And I said, guys, I kind of want to do another pass. I think I can do it better. And David and Robert were like, no. I was like, come on. And so they's like, okay, go in there. So I went in and I got the percussionist to do another take. And I kind of thought like, okay, now I know some of the ideas I was playing with, and now I'm going to play them better and do other stuff. And then when it was done, I thought I did really well. I came in the control room, and everybody was like, no, we're erasing that. The first take is the one you get. That
reminds me of David talking about Thrack, but on the very first time you guys ever tracked it. You remember that if you listen to the interview, and he said that he'd never heard the song before. You did it once down. And then yeah, it sounds pretty good. And Bill's like, can you punch me in? And he's like, I've never even heard this before. Yeah, just punch me in bar 157 to 159.
Yeah, that's funny.
Dumb question. Do you, when you're doing odd meter stuff, which is a lot, obviously, how do you think of it? Do you ever count it in your mind? Or do you just think of it as pieces?
Let's put it like this. I like the odd meters to float on top of a pulse. So I like it to feel like it's rock and roll, even if it's chopped up. So I will feel a slow. I'll feel this, and then on top of that, I can do anything. Well, Allman Brothers. That 11, I don't even remember which song it is. The sense where the odd meter is kind of kicking the bar over each time. I don't like that. I don't like that. And we never did that with Crimson. There was always this sense of this. So I'm hoping this is in answering your question. Yeah. So I need the slow pulse underneath, and that's kind of what I feel in my hips and my body, in my legs and my hips. Then it's all combinations of threes and twos on top. That's a short answer.
I suppose that's when you're playing pieces that you've rehearsed, but when you're soloing, that's in your mind, you're feeling that pulse.
As complicated as the stuff that I do play, it's still not dream theater level of complication. Let's put it like that. For me, I don't need every bar changing. I don't need, it's not super contemporary classical music where you've got to be counting every bar because they're always changing, So what I'll do is, I'll, like, say we're playing in 7 and I'm soloing. I'm going to keep the feel of the 7 underneath. I'm going to keep that going underneath, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
You can't just throw a new rhythm to yourself and expect it to be in there. You've got to learn these, just like intervals and chords. You have to spend time with them and develop a relationship with the 7, and that's different than a 9, and there's different 9s. And um, I spent a fair bit of time working with some Indian musicians as well, and that they've helped me just discover other stuff and see how they work. It's a whole other level.
I feel like the learned, structured way of doing it actually holds back the creativity, because like you said earlier, people come to you and say, "Oh, I want to get serious at playing music, so now I need to learn to read music." And you're like, "Well, why?" Not that I'm saying you shouldn't learn to read music. I can read music, and it's a wonderful tool.
Yeah.
But I don't. 99% of the time, if I'm doing a session, if I'm just being a musician, people will say to me, "Give me a solo that feels like a bit like Hendrix meets blah blah blah." They're not throwing something at me and playing it just like this. It has happened, but it's really super, super rare. And it almost feels like the end goal is to just feel what you're doing and have freedom. And so does the knowledge and the technique allow that? Or the reason why I bring it up, because you brought up Indian musicians.
Yeah.
They don't have our structured Western way of teaching. So how do they get there? They're taught to feel the music. I'm intrigued. Did you ask those questions?
They also do, at least the ones I've looked at. This is a big question you're asking.
I know.
That's a deep question.
Yeah.
And we could run in a lot of different directions. The Indian musicians I know, especially the percussionists, they're doing a lot of math at the same time as the feel. They are. But it doesn't get in the way of the feel. The most important thing is the feel. And I was even taught that, the syllables that they speak, you can sub-vocalize some of those syllables, and man, your groove just gets thicker and thicker. I think you have to go for, you can't just dabble with the kind of intellectual structure. You're going to get, you got to take it and go further. Otherwise, I think it's going to sound like it's in the way, if you know what I mean. Like you have to get it so that it's natural. And for me, it's a little bit natural now, the numbers and the feel, if that makes sense.
I remember, was it Rod Morgenstein? Years ago, I was talking to him. He said, "You know how to count 7, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7."
Right.
Yeah. Only nerds will understand that one.
I'm actually we didn't really talk about it, but just a funny little teaser. I'm having a couple of different instruments built, because now I play on my lap.
Yeah.
I don't play an instrument like this. I play on my lap, and I'm having some custom instruments built.
What was the process to moving into your lap?
I'll give you a hint. Look at my wrist.
Yeah.
That's how we play this thing.
Right. Yeah.
It was so bad for my body. And about 12 or 15 years ago, I realized that I'm not going to be able to do this when I'm 70.
Wow.
And I started playing around with.
Is that because of, sorry to derail you for a second, is that because it's a huge neck, the tension, the work, compared with maybe a little guitar player neck like I have with only 6 strings?
It's a lot of that. It's the neck, but also reaching over. I mean, you're just not, that's not. And here's a really interesting thing. Like, okay, I mean, that looks terrible. When I'm looking at it, it looks really terrible. But that's how we play. And even this hand is at a funny angle. I did some experimenting playing on the lap, and I couldn't play very well. And I called up Mark. I was like, "Mark, I'm trying to play on my lap, and the dynamic range is like notes are popping out." He's like, maybe there's something about the strings being horizontal. Maybe it's something that. And what we discovered was that physically, this is creating compression in the fingers, and you're not actually playing dynamically like a keyboardist. And so I've switched to that. So I'm having some custom instruments built, and if you see me play live, I'll have one of them.
How long have you been doing that?
It started with Crimson because I wanted to have both instruments in the same song, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. So what I ended up doing was I wore the fretless one, and then I got a keyboard stand for the fretted one, and I put it up on a keyboard stand. And there's a piece that we played that grew out of the projects, but we played it with Crimson, called "The Deception of the Thrush," where I would solo with the fretted war guitar up on the keyboard stand. And so I kind of started it around 2002, but I didn't really take it super seriously. And maybe 10 years ago, I started to take it really seriously and looking at what you can do. And for me, it's the future of tapping. It really is. It doesn't make sense to come up here like this.
So you're completely intriguing me. I want to see you play like that.
And what's really cool is the body down here. It doesn't need to be there. That's just for guitars. So we're actually going to spread the body out. Yeah, it's just like a keyboard.
Well, that's what I was thinking the whole time. I'm thinking to myself, I never took proper piano lessons. I'm just a guitar player, plays piano. But I do remember it was always supposed to be like you're like squeezing a lemon, and it's supposed to be quite natural and not like this, not flat.
Yeah.
And just so it was just kind of where naturally your hand would rest, so you could play for long periods of time.
You want as little tension as possible for this tapping technique. It's easy to build up tension. And also the thing about this is you have gravity as your friend. You can use gravity. You're just releasing the finger to the string.
So both hands in the same direction like a piano.
So actually how I look at the instrument now is I just see a single string. I think the full length of the string, and then I just have multiple strings.
I'm excited to see that. Now, are you going to be standing and playing it?
That is uncertain. Because I'm used to having it on my lap, so I'm sitting. It's not very rock and roll,
right?
But I have been talking to one of the builders who's got an idea for a stand,
right?
So then I could stand up and dance around like an idiot.
How did Jeff Healey play? He sat.
I think it was on his lap.
I'm looking at photos here. I've got some of him on a lap and then some of him standing.
Well, David Lindley used to do a thing, didn't he? He would flip his guitar up, and there was like a rod or something that would make the body flat, and then he could play like a slide.
Thanks, Trey. I really appreciate this. We're going to get tour dates from you. Whatever you have coming up, we'll link to obviously your discography down below. So please look down below. Go listen to his music on Spotify, Apple Music, whatever. Go buy it. Actually, buy it. Buy it. It's a really good thing. I really appreciate it. Let's stay in contact. I want to see you play live sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be watching you online.
Well, that I really appreciate. Thanks, everyone, for watching. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, toutes zines, goodbye, ciao.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers, Warren.